if he couldn't get out of that country soon, then the Taliban were going to find him. There was a good chance he and his family were going to be executed if something didn't happen.
You are about to embark upon the Great Crusade
to meet this mounting aggression.
And make no mistake about it, good will prevail.
Becoming a Green Beret was something that I'd wanted to do since I was like 14 years old. Ever since I was a little kid growing up in a little logging town of Mount Ida, Arkansas, I met a Green Beret in our soda shop, and it just changed my life. I wanted to do that for the rest of my life. So I went in the Army as a second lieutenant, and you had to wait about 4.5 years before you can even try out. So I went in 1991 and wasn't able to even try out until 1995. And then you go through like a 3-week selection course, and then ultimately made it through. It's about an 18-month training pipeline. And it's a lot of intense training. And then, the whole focus about becoming a Green Beret, we're different than the Navy SEALs in the sense that Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, they go in on a target, they take the target down, and they come off the target very quickly. Green Berets usually work by, with, and through indigenous people to go after a target or to take an action. We work with locals to help them stand up on their own. So we're kind of like relationship-based connectors. We go into places and live for very long periods of time. So we're big on language, culture, immersion into local environments. So the training requires a lot of that as well, a lot of people skills. Well, in the early days of the Afghan campaign, you had a Taliban force that was entrenched in the country. They were essentially governing the country. They were the military of the country, and Al-Qaeda was embedded with them. So the response from the United States after 9/11 was to go after Osama bin Laden and his senior leadership who were responsible for the attacks, but also to dismantle the Taliban leadership and to usher in a new type of leadership in the country that would be more representative of the Afghan people and hopefully, less hospitable to terrorism. Because at the end of the day, Afghanistan was a terrorism safe haven. It was a place where Al-Qaeda could rest, refit, plan, and project the worst attack in American history. They surprised us by being able to go in there, and because we didn't have a network on the ground, we didn't know what they were doing. We had reports, but they were able to pull off strategic surprise on the United States by attacking the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and they caught us completely off guard because we had no presence on the ground. So the intent here was to get into the country and not only, find Osama bin Laden, defeat Al-Qaeda, push the Taliban out of leadership, and then usher in a form of leadership in that country that would be more representative of the Afghan people and also more, friendly to the United States and pose less of a terror risk. So the way that we did that was, again, largely by special operations forces going after Osama bin Laden and targeting him with direct action, while simultaneously putting Green Berets in there to mobilize the Northern Alliance, to go on horseback and basically rout the Taliban by mobilizing the indigenous people to stand up against them. And that's exactly what they did. In less than 90 days, less than 100 Green Berets pushed the entire Taliban leadership out of the country and into Pakistan. We were very focused on attriting the Taliban, attriting Al-Qaeda. Now, we did put in place, other elements of democracy, infrastructure, elections. But the problem was, while we were attriting the enemy and walking the enemy down, which was basically putting the Afghan villagers kind of at odds with us, we were also coming from the top down with these new elements of democracy and technology. And it was a lot of the stuff that this culture was not ready for. Rather than mobilizing the Afghan people the way we did in the beginning, and then pivoting right into, okay, now how do we work with the local communities using Green Berets? How do we help them stand up on their own in ways that are locally appropriate for their culture? And simultaneously working with the central government to stand up an army and those kind of things. We went all from the top down. We were like, okay, the Taliban's out of the country. Now we're going to create an Afghanistan in our own image, with the preferred Western way of democracy, liberal democracies, elections, modern technology. And that was fine for Kabul, the city, but not the rural areas. These are very conservative, mountainous areas that were not ready for that kind of change. And we were out of touch. And frankly, what we did was we created a narrative for the Taliban to drive right back in and tell the local people, see, they don't understand you at all. They want to change your life, change your culture, change everything about you. And we won't do that if you'll work with us. And so without even realizing it, we created the fuel for the insurgency that the Taliban would use for the next couple of decades. You know, I think one of the things that goes on when presidential administrations and politicians talk about Afghanistan, or probably any war for that matter, they're very loath to own the problem. And this is where I think veterans get really upset, is because, you know, politicians start and end wars. Militaries fight them on behalf of the politicians. But it's very rare that you'll see a politician who will own the problem. You know, like they won't stand up like veterans do and we say, okay, the first 10 years we made a mistake, here's where we did, and this is what we did to change it. You'll seldom see a politician do that. And I think with Afghanistan, you see this, like where the Trump administration, and in my book, Game Changers, I talk about really every administration that prosecuted the war on terror from 9/11 onward was underwhelming to me. I don't think that they showed up with the kind of leadership and, frankly, technical and tactical prowess around the Afghan problem and the Iraq problem that was worthy of the men and women who fought it. Am I making sense? Because they went deep. The people who fought this war got pretty deep on the problem. The politicians who nominated the war and who kept it going really didn't. They were superficial on it. They were casual about it. They were pedestrians in their understanding of the war. There were a few exceptions, but not many. So now you look at, for example, when things started to fall apart, really fall apart, I think it was under the Trump administration. I think that the approach that they took to the negotiations, I think they were exclusionary. I think that they left out some critical people, namely the Afghan government. I think that it was approached more as a business deal than a true negotiation for peace. And I think that had there been even a fundamental understanding of how things work in that country, you would not have had what the Biden administration then executed on, right? So I do believe the Biden administration owns every bit of what happened with this debacle. But the Trump administration doesn't get a pass either, because their negotiations leading up to it, their desire to get rapidly out of the country with no stay-behind capacity for helping communities, reflects their lack of knowledge or even will to do the right thing as it pertained to Afghanistan and the 20 years of sacrifice that our community put into it. And no one's going to change my mind on that. Like, I look at this problem deeply. I've studied this problem for 2 decades, and I found the politicians who prosecuted this war to be severely underwhelming. Regardless of what the Biden administration was saying in July of 2021, that the country of Afghanistan was going to hold, you know, things would be fine, I was getting texts from a dear friend of mine named Nizam, who was a former Special Forces and commando in the Afghan Army, who I had known since 2010. I had trained him, I'd gone to combat with him, and he was in hiding in Kabul already. And he was saying, Herat has fallen. The Kandahar prison has been raided. The Taliban released all the prisoners. Ismail Khan has surrendered in the west. Dostum has surrendered in the north. These were fighters who had stood against the Taliban for decades, were surrendering like that. Everything was falling like dominoes. And so there was a real contrast to what the administration was saying to what was actually happening. And, you know, by July, it was very clear that things were going to take a very negative direction in that country, despite what DC was saying. And so there was a good chance he and his family were going to be executed if something didn't happen. Because if he couldn't get out of that country soon, then the Taliban were going to find him, the other commandos, the other Afghan special forces, and the odds are they were not going to take very kindly to the premier fighting force that had kept them at bay for 20 years. So, you know, it started to register in my mind that we might have to do something to help Nizam. I started reaching out to friends in DC, friends in Special Operations Command that were still active duty, but no one seemed to be able to do anything. And they were starting to get concerned about their friend too, or their interpreter. But there still was not what you saw with the collapse of Kabul, this just this overt, like almost panic. It was just this growing alarm. By the end of the summer of 2021, late July, early August, It was like maybe we're going to have to do something in a more accelerated fashion than what we've been doing. We started with James Meek, an ABC reporter, 2 other Green Berets on active duty, Kelsey, the staffer to Congressman Mike Waltz, and myself. That was our eclectic little team that was going to rescue, or not rescue, but help Nizam, get across the city of Kabul. And this was no easy task. This is a Dari-speaking Uzbek, right, former commando, who's going to have to navigate a city close to the size of New York, with Taliban Pashtun-speaking checkpoints at every street corner because they've taken over the city now. He doesn't know the city very well. If he gets captured, if he gets stopped at a checkpoint, he's done. He's going to be executed because he doesn't speak their language. Then he's got to get to the airfield and get through a Taliban perimeter there, 30,000 people thronging the airfield trying to get in, and then get a gate open by nervous U.S. Marines and soldiers, and then get on an airplane that he may or may not be manifested on. So that was our dilemma. How do you get a guy across the city like that? And oh, by the way, you're not going into the country to do it. You're going to have to do everything remote. You're going to have to accomplish all of this and be his eyes, his ears, his shepherd, his Sherpa, to move him across that city using nothing but your craft and the relationships that you've built over the last 20 years. And that's where we were. Now, at the time, remember, this isn't a task force. These are retired folks for the most part, and civilians, right? And so there was no chain of command. There was a singular focus, and it was on helping get Nizam and his family to safety. That was it, to help a friend, to honor a promise. And we tried to stay calm. We used our understanding of the environment because we'd been there many times. And we leveraged our relationships, whether that was putting him in a dirty cab driven by a Pashtun-speaking friend that I'd worked with for years, or, getting him to within a few feet of the checkpoints, and then Nizam using his own craft to move around those checkpoints and talk his way through them, and then us trusting him and knowing his skill set that he would come back on the phone when he got to a point where he was 4 feet within the gate, and then leveraging relationships that James had inside the airfield with another reporter to put him in touch with a State Department guy that was a former Green Beret that said, tell him to say pineapple, right? And that was the call sign that the Marines were listening for, and he said pineapple. That's how Task Force Pineapple came to be, right? It was simply using relationships and singular focus on one thing, save Nizam. And that's how we did it. There was no chain of command. Different people led at different times, which is really the essence of leadership, right? Is knowing when to lead and when not to lead, but staying focused on the singular purpose. And that's how it went. And once that was done and we got Nizam to safety and his family on an airplane, then we thought we were done. But then it turns out we were getting other requests from Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, Green Berets, friends of ours who said, hey, my interpreter is in a really bad way. What do you think? Hey, my former partner in Afghan Special Forces and his family can't get to the airfield. What should we do? And we decided that, okay, we're going to honor the promise. We're going to stay in this thing. We're going to open up a signal chat room. We're going to go bigger, and we're going to work together using what we had used with Nizam. But now we were going to collaborate and be each other's eyes and ears in that signal room. And then the individual shepherds could talk to their flocks, as we called them in that time of duress, and be their eyes and ears because we knew who they were. We knew where they were, and they trusted us. And that was the value proposition that we could present to the soldiers and Marines on the other side of the perimeter who looked out at 30,000 people. Where do you even start? Right? But we could move them close in a disciplined way with their families, do far recognition signals, near recognition signals, and then move them through in a disciplined way. And that was really the value proposition that Task Force Pineapple and so many of these other veteran groups brought. It wasn't getting on the ground and moving them. It was leveraging the trust and relationships to help them move and present themselves. They're the ones that really took the risk and endured the dangers. I think our work became very vital when we recognized that the U.S. forces were not permitted to leave the perimeter. They weren't permitted to push out. So then, how do you assist your Afghan partners in moving through the city with their families? How do you assist them in getting to the right gate? Because you don't know which gate's going to open. And there's thousands, tens of thousands of people everywhere. And the gate might only open for 20 minutes, then it shuts again, right? So we became their eyes and ears. By collaborating in that chat room and with discipline, we were able to share in real time which gates were open, which gates were closed, based on what our flocks were seeing from their vantage point. And then we could maneuver them with their families using that commando style discipline that you needed in those times of duress and those times of high stakes. But also we could get the reporting back from them on what they were seeing. In some cases, we were even able to repurpose commandos and special forces to help pick up orphans or teenagers that had been separated from their families, or at-risk females who were traveling alone. So it became critical. We became, that's where the term shepherds came from. We became the eyes and ears of those at-risk Afghans who couldn't move or who were at high risk to move. And we could help them using technology and craft navigate that complexity, and then using real-time collaboration, we could exploit opportunities that otherwise there's no way they would have seen if they were just navigating on their own. Or if a shepherd was navigating on his own without that collaboration with other people and talking about what they were seeing. The attack, the ISIS attack, was a really crappy day. It was the end to what was a very beautiful body of work by volunteers across the spectrum, inside the perimeter and here at home, and a lot of courage on the part of the Afghan people, and just a desperate race to get just one more inside the wire. I think deep down all of us knew that probably something bad was going to happen, that there was no way that you could put that many people trying to get out of the country without a group like ISIS trying to cause harm. And we were working it right up until the very end. Afghans were wading through the canals. We were trying to help several young girls who had become separated, and we were trying to find them. And then the bomb went off. And for us here in the States, it was simply silence. And the words that came across the screen that make your blood turn to ice, which is, there's been an explosion. And I think we all knew in that moment that there had been a lot of deaths. There's no way there couldn't be. And I knew at that moment that it was over. There was nobody else getting into that airfield, at least not at-risk Afghans. That was it. And that there was going to have to be a whole new approach to how we did this, and a whole lot of people were going to be left behind. I don't know that it's right for me to say how many lives we saved, because I really have to give the credit to the Afghan people and their willingness to get to freedom and endure tremendous suffering. I think they saved their own lives. I think we assisted as guides. I think our special ops volunteers and the other volunteers are to be commended. These are men and women who quit their jobs. They left their jobs as teachers. They cashed out their 401ks to send money over. Many of them were severely traumatized from their life in war before. They had put that behind them, and then they re-entered that trauma just to help their friends. I don't know, I'd say between maybe 500 and 700 at the airfield over a couple of days, and then maybe a few hundred more since this has happened. We've assisted in some way. Much more work to do. There could be as many as 100,000 at-risk Afghans still in the country. So I don't want to, claim victory on a couple of hundred. I think it's great and it'll make a difference, but there's so much more to do to honor the promise that I really want to stay focused on that.